Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking, which is perhaps something I should learn to do myself. Okay, thank you very much. Appointment of substitutes. I don't think we've got any today, have we?
There are none tonight, Chair. Thank you.
Here. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the last meeting, which according to the meetings in front of me, it was the 4th of June. Does anybody have any comments on? I can go through page by page, or I can just take it that you're going to tell me if anybody's got any concern. They're perfect minutes. So well done to Margaret. I assume that was you. For perfect minutes. Is everybody happy to sign those off then? Okay, so we will sign those off and move straight on to Q1 performance report, which Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go through all the details of the report because I'm sure everybody has read them intensely before this evening's meeting. Other to say that the projects are all on target, and the waste and recycling one I will just point out, next week is the week we make the changes from Tuesday, so hopefully all residents will have received extra recycling bags and the leaflet with all the information on regarding the recycling, but we are hitting that target today. The other item that I would like to draw attention to is the household waste recycling. We have got a report further on in the agenda with some recommendations, and I think looking at that longer term, this will be something that we'll be able to target and hopefully see an increase in that target, the PI. The other one that I also would like to draw attention to is around the surveys we do on the street cleanliness. Some are done in the city centre and then some are done in the place area. We are going to look at a bit of a deep dive around those surveys to see a little bit more information around where the areas we're sort of just not hitting that excellent. We've got a couple of areas that we've missed out on this quarter's report. So I think that's something that we would like to do a bit more of a deep dive on to see where is it we need to start looking at our rotas and change the staff, the times of working, etc. So those are just the few things that I would like to point out unless anybody's got any questions.
So anybody got any questions or reflections on the performance report? John.
Thank you, Chair. I asked last time about the connection between the City Council and the County Council, because the recycling bit is the bit that I was interested in, and your colleague said it's a joint operation, which I appreciate was true but not very helpful. My question was really trying to get at who is it at City who works with County to try and reduce, let's say, the waste, the sort of contamination, for example, in the green bin, to get that sort of figure down. It just doesn't seem to me that we have a finger on, or a finger on the pulse, if you like, or a good grasp on who's going to be involved in improving that target. If we say it's County and County say it's us, we just go around in circles. It seems a bit pointless.
Thank you, Councillor. As part of the report that's going to come out later, we're going to look at how we at the city can increase our recycling targets. It is also one of the offlog measures from a contamination point of view and reducing the residual, the black waste. So we're going to look at how we can target that. It is a joint approach. We work in partnership with County Council. We are the collection authority, they're the disposal. But it's something that we think we need to start owning and taking that forward with some recommendations in my report later.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions, if that's all right. With the public bin investment programme, does that include parks? And if so, I have a specific question. When are Gallivant Park bins going to be replaced? And then I've got another comment actually, which is the domestic food waste. I note in the report that we're talking about the funding, and what I'd just like to know is whether with the new government we're going to, I know that I went to the previous MP and made him aware of how we'd not got enough money as a council, and I'd just like to know whether it's something perhaps David you would raise with our new MP just to see whether we can get the funding that we want, so, and also to reinforce how the timescale is actually a real challenge at the moment, the longer we don't have more information. Thank you.
David.
If I could pick up that first, if that's okay. So we met with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So I'm just making sure I get the name right now. Week before last, and raised a whole range of issues from the funding for the food collection through to the fact that UK SBF ends in March next year, through to the fact that we're waiting on the answer for a £5 million bid. And they just said, you know, you'll just have to, we know they're all on the list, you'll just have to bear with us. So I took that as good news, rather than them saying, you know, we're reconsidering anything. So I'll give it another week, and then I'll be on to them again. And I've just written to Tom Collins as a follow-up from the motion to full council regarding the cricket, and I've added a number of things on to the list. So once I'm waiting for him to get back to me now for a meeting. Once we get together, he's very keen to meet. Obviously, it's just time. So once I meet with Tom, that will be on the list as well. Thank you.
With regards to the bins, yes, Gallivant Park is included, and I think it's the next on the list. With Gallivant, we're going to be looking at some historical and ornamental bins that need to be refurbished, but they are on the list. So I'll get a firm date for you, Karen, and confirm that. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking on page 15, and it's the overflow and littered dog waste bins dealt with on time, which we've been consistently unable to meet the targets, even though we're quite good and high success at the levels that we are doing. It forces me to ask the question, is the target unreasonable? Or are we now, and I see what's said underneath about we've now got new vehicles, but do we need to assess the target to make sure it's a reasonable target, or not just a target which is destined to fail as a result of it being so high?
Thank you, Councillor Udall. I think the target sits at the right level. I think we have had quite significant fleet issues over the last couple of quarters, which I think has given us a little bit of a backlog, so we are on catch-up, but we've rectified that now. So I think the target is a good one to keep as is. However, I do know that Lloyd has mentioned around looking at the scorecard and a group of councillors looking at what you want us to measure going forward. So if that's something that you want to take forward as part of that working group, I can take that forward to Lloyd, but I do think previously we've hit it quite well. I think we've just had a significant few quarters that we've had lots of issues around maintenance and breakdowns and being diverted to other areas of the business.
actually, you were sort of preempting my follow-up question to that. Was there is a group? I don't think we've had an update on any date for that working group to look at the performance, but we do actually now have confirmed membership, so hopefully that will move ahead quite quickly. And you're going to have to remind me about the forward plan, but I think looking at the street scene is coming to the next Environment Committee, so members will recall that we decided that we would look at each meeting a deep dive into some area of the council's business that's under Environment Committee. So today we've got the item on waste and recycling, and Karen will probably nod as well. I think the street scene was the one that was going to come in for the next committee, so that will pick up those issues, Richard. Okay, next I have Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about the working group as to when we were going to next hear more about that, and also keen to sort of follow up about the suggestions from full council that I tried to make during the meeting, but then sent afterwards by email. So just that again, that relates more to street scene, but very keen that we improve our recycling rates, which are not where they should be in order to enable government funding, and for our street scene, look forward to when our issue of this is the summer of smelly bins, and hopefully that issue is now soon being resolved. Thank you.
I don't know whether you want to come back on. I know that you've got Councillor Cross's suggestions, whether you've had a chance to look at them or whether that's being built into the report going forward.
Yes, Councillor Cross, I've got a copy of the information you circulated at full council, and we're currently looking at that. If we can try and implement before the next Environment Committee, we will do, or it may be that we bring back as part of the street scene report. Okay, thank you.
Happy to meet, available at any time to meet and discuss and go through, because that would always be a pleasure. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to congratulate Sandra and her team on green flag status in our Premier Parks. Well done, that was really great for the city. Gulliver stakeholders meeting has been postponed twice, and I've been trying to get a date from officers. That's a really integral part to the working and partnership of the park. When can we see a date going forward, please? Thank you.
I'll pick that up when I go back in the office. We have replaced Doug's role with Nella Bellinger, who started this week with us, so she will be getting out to meet relevant people, etc. But I'll make sure that we pick the stakeholders back up. We put it on hold due to the general election, so we're going to revisit the dates and get them all back out again. Okay, thank you.
Next on my list, I've got Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Yes, I want to go back to the indicator about overflowing bins, if I could, Chair and Sandra, and the following one, fly tipping cleared within time. I completely accept that customer complaints about fly tipping is the main way that we have to identify them, but I think the previous one about number of, or the speed of response to customers complaining about an overflow bin is a bit step away from the reality of it. We should be looking at the number of bins overflowing, number one, and two, that this one is the percent of them dealt with it. It doesn't even say how many complaints we've got. So I'd rather have the quantities rather than the percentage, if we could. I think that's a more realistic and a valuable indicator.
I think that was picked up at full council as well, that something
Okay.
we need to be doing. Right, that was the one that was...
I must have been asleep.
I have Councillor Lawrence next, but I think Councillor Lewin, Karen, was your comment in relation? It was a separate one. Okay, in that case, we'll go to Councillor Lawrence first.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite minor. It's just the Gulliver Park stakeholders meeting. I've tried to arrange to, well, I have arranged to work from home on a couple of occasions, and it's been moved. So I'd rather, if we set these dates, if we could stick to these dates, because they have to be in person. I can't do a Teams meeting to it. And I appreciate they want to do it in the park, but it's just very difficult if you then have arranged to be available and then it's being moved. Then I have to work at home. Just work.
Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I'm going to mention Gillivant Park again because everyone will have noticed that the splash pad has been out of action on probably the warmest day of the year so far. And I was just wondering what officers were going to do about it, please, whether there's any plan about how we can make sure that it's open for the rest of the summer. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Lloyd and I spoke about this earlier this week. We probably spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, and we probably spoke about it a month ago. We've agreed that, and you may know this already because it might have percolated down, what I've agreed with Lloyd is we need to produce a report that sets out how many times the splash pad has failed, what the duration of each failure was, what the specific reason for the failure, whether it's a small number of recurring failures or whether it's a very large number of somewhat random failures, because that would imply that the whole of the splash pad is perhaps reaching the end of its working life rather than a particular problem with a component failure. I've asked also for a breakdown of the costs in terms of are the repairs being met through a maintenance agreement, or are we paying on an individual basis for the repairs? And I've also asked for response times to the repairs if we are bringing in an external organisation to do that. So there is a whole raft of data that we need in order to determine whether this is a systemic failure of the whole of the splash pad. I'm not sure. I mean, it's been there ever since I've been here, which is 11 years. I'm not sure when it was installed, and I'm not sure what the reasonable life of such a product is. But until we get some of those answers, I'm afraid, obviously, I can't give any more information, but I'm expecting quite a detailed analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think it's just really important. Obviously, we get a satisfaction with parks and play areas, and I really think this is something that will be on people's radar in the next annual survey if we don't sort it out. Thank you.
And I guess my question is related to the point that Karen just pointed out where it fits with our scorecard, but I was just thinking in terms of making decisions about the splash pad, I'm not clear quite where it sits in the committee system, and I suspect we need Sian here to tell us that, because I know the play strategy sits with paired, communities have involvement with some of the things, clearly it's part of parks and therefore environment. I think there's just a danger that this issue will end up in lots of different committees and there's perhaps a piece of work that needs to be done to clarify which committee needs to be looking at that detailed report, or whether it's an officer report and how it gets reported back to members, maybe through leadership.
Okay.
I don't know whether you have any thoughts on where it fits.
I would say this committee, but as I'm sitting here, that's the easy answer, isn't it? So I think possession being 9/10 of the law, and I think this committee seems to be possessing the item. I don't think we'd have a problem bringing it back to this committee. It will depend, of course, what we find. Worst case scenario is a big investment decision if it continues, and I hope very much it doesn't. I'm apart from the technical issues and the cost of it, I'm acutely aware of how embarrassing it looks for the council in terms of PR. We cannot obviously carry on as we are. I'm very aware that it looks incredibly embarrassing in terms of our performance. Thank you.
Were you trying to come in there, Councillor Cross?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I believe the Gulliver splash pad was installed June 2010. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions or points that they want to ask about the performance report? If not, is everybody happy to note the Q1 performance report? Yeah. Okay, in that case, we will move on. And our next item, check I'm on the right part of the agenda, is about the electoral vehicle infrastructure strategy consultation. So I'm going to hand over to David.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. The County Council have published a draft electric vehicle charging strategy for consultation. So we're asking the committee tonight to consider a response for that and then delegate the authority to submit the detailed response to myself in consultation with the Chair and the Vice Chair of the committee. The consultation runs until the 3rd of September. As some background, be aware electric vehicles are increasing and now over 28% of new registrations in the country are electric vehicles. And there's some figures here that there are, according to government figures, over 900 plug-in vehicles in the city. 677 of those in private individual ownership and the rest of them are company vehicles. And there are around 90 public EV charging points in the city. Back in June of last year, this council approved its first electric vehicle charging strategy. That was primarily structured around opportunities that we had to install chargers on our own land. So we've had chargers in St Martin's Gate car park for a couple of years now. We installed in King Street, and Tallow Hill is just about to open. The chargers are in place now. Important to recognise really that grant funding is at the moment required to support a financial business case to install chargers, to be able to sell that electricity at a competitive market rate and ensure that that's financially viable, which is still a rate considerably greater than the cost of charging at home for those people that are able to charge at home. So the council has published its, the county council has published its draft strategy. The strategy is very much focused on what's called the Levi funding, local electric vehicle infrastructure, which is a government funding stream only available at the county council level at tier 1, not available to the city council at tier 2. And it aims to deliver a step change in deployment of local charging infrastructure on street, so focused at those people that are unable to charge at home, that don't have off-street parking. And there's a series of questions and a structured consultation, but the council, county council, have also said they will take broader feedback, and that's what I would be intending for us to send in. So the link to the strategy is there. Members may have been able to read that. Just to pick out some of the key points. So there's £3.5 million of grant funding being sought by the county council citywide. And the intention is to enter into a public-private commercial partnership, which will see over 25 million invested, using a concession model. So some comments that officers have pulled out from the strategy. We recommend that the strategy should acknowledge the significant disparity between the cost of charging for those with off-street parking and public charging costs. That's something that's not mentioned. So there are lots of good things in the strategy, but we've picked up some areas of concern that we think should be addressed. So nose-to-curb charging opportunities are specified as a preference, so that would be parking perpendicular to the footway when cars are parking on the highway. For Worcester, there are very few sites that we've been able to identify where that would be a viable option, where the highway allows that nose-to-curb parking. The strategy also specifies a preference for accessible sites. It doesn't make it clear whether those are all the sites would be fully accessible or whether there's a number of accessible sites. So that's an item that would require greater clarity. Site selection, it does prioritise sites with the best locations for the chargers. There is a real difficulty in installing on-street parking, and there's a known correlation between areas without off-street parking, so the older areas of the city, particularly with terraced housing, There's a correlation between areas without off-street parking and higher levels of deprivation. So that does bring a particular challenge. The areas that might be most suitable may not bring equality across the city. We've had discussions with county council officers, and their intention is to work with district councils. It's uncertain at the moment what terms of a concession model might be if charges was to be installed on city land. Within our strategy, our next phase was to look at leisure centres and community centres and other parcels of council land where we could install chargers. Just noting at the moment, the business case would require grant funding. There's no grant funding being identified. So there's, that will be subject to grant funding being available. So there's a lot of work to do with the county council about how that might work on our land, if charges on our land were to be operated by a private company. A key point really is around, for on-street charging, is around cable gullies, and this strategy rules out cable gullies as an infrastructure solution. There are considerable concerns about the maintenance and cleaning of these, potential damage to the structural integrity of the footway. It's a considerable amount of construction to put something in that's robust and will last in the highway. But ruling that out has a real significant impact on the ability to deliver charge points in many, many areas of the city. And the strategy doesn't also address the potential for the County Council as the Highways Authority to work with charge point operators outside of the Levi Fund, so where there may be a potential for a commercial case for on-street charging. So those are the main points that are brought out. I'm happy to take questions and take notes to feed into our deliberations when we compile the response to the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think it's really positive that the County Council is allowing us to do broader feedback, because I think we do definitely want to do some feedback around this that isn't just purely about this particular funding stream and our overall concerns about the importance of the approach that's being taken. I'd also like to thank officers for flagging up some of those concerns in this report. I think from this discussion what we need to be very clear is, are we as a committee happy with those concerns that have been expressed, and for those to be fed back to the County Council, and are there other points that you would like to make sure that are included in that? So I'm going to start with Councillor Cross, and then I've got Councillor Udall, and then Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. The points I wanted to raise were related to us having very few sites where vehicles park nose to curb, so thank you for covering that. Thank you also for picking up about the cable gullies being ruled out. And I know there's at least a couple of providers who've been emailing us suggesting them. I don't want to mention any names here, but I wonder whether since the original stance was taken that no, we're not going to include cable gullies, that actually maybe the market offering has improved and moved forwards, because it does have such a big impact as identified, as you've explained, and as per the House of Lords Urban Transport Group saying insufficient access to reliable charging is one of the main barriers to drivers who are considering an electric vehicle, and 50% of the What Car readers surveyed cited that the charging network was a reason for not going electric. So it's absolutely central, and this totally ties in with our air quality management. So thank you.
Do you want to make any comments on that, David, or are you happy that we'll just move straight to Councillor Udall?
Thank you, Chair. It's the same point issue, in honesty. It's about the cable gullies, and I'm struggling to understand the intelligence of the County Council when they continue to say no to cable gullies. If we're going to have people having electric vehicles, in a place like Worcester, where so many people do not have off-road parking, you need to have the ability to charge your vehicle close to your home. And the only way of physically doing that is through cable gullies. Now, I recognise some of the comments which have been mentioned as a reason not to do it. it's not been a problem for every other local authority in the country who do allow cable gullies. It's just Worcestershire standing alone, as far as I can see now, who are obstructing the use of cable gullies in their county. And as long as this continues, we will not have the ability to transfer and change the structure of vehicles in the city from petrol and diesel to electric. There are 2,000 houses within 5 minutes walk of St John's Church without off-street parking. Huge amount of people who will not have the ability to access an electric vehicle. They currently have their cable restriction across the footpath. It would be safer for all of us if there was a cable gully. And to deny that, to refuse that, is actually hampering the expansion of electric vehicles in Worcester. And we need to challenge that fairly and squarely to the County Council and say, get your act into gear, excuse the language, pun, get yourself organised, do what every other local authority in the country with highway responsibility does, facilitate a way of having cable gullies, facilitate a way to make sure that they are maintained and cleansed and kept in order, and let's go on and actually allow residents to pay for them, have them installed and have them using them, because without it, we're doomed, bluntly, in having electric vehicles in Worcester. We can't have them. It's as simple as that. We either have our gullies or we don't expand and change, and we'll be left behind other areas. Sorry to be so blunt about it, but I feel very strongly that the County Council are deliberately hampering the expansion of electric vehicles by not allowing on-street charging and not allowing cable gullies. Residents will be forced to continue with petrol and diesel if we don't act.
And I'm seeing a lot of nods around the room. Can I just confirm that that view is shared by the room, and that we would like to make sure that we're asking officers in that response to make that point very, very forcibly. So just confirming that that's not a Richard view, that's a committee view. David.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually got a meeting with John Hobbs tomorrow, and the list of things I want to talk about is growing almost exponentially at the moment. So I will add it to the list to talk to John. Thank you.
And I think we're giving you a very clear mandate, David, that in the response that obviously Cameron and I, hopefully people will agree, we'll have the authority to sign that off, but we want that view made very strongly. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. This feels like we're in an air quality management area and the County Council are not taking this seriously. This is a public health emergency almost. You know, we have to be seen to be doing something, and they are holding us back. When 2 or 3 summers ago I went to Poole near Bournemouth, and they had on-street car parking in residents' parking bays. So on the actual road, they have the charger. Why can't that be done? We have residents' parking areas, especially in Arboretum. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 or 4 streets that have drives in Arboretum Ward. You know, this is something that the county could put in, they could be profiting from. This could be a real bonus to having residents' car parking. I'd like to see a lot stronger, and I feel this is too weak, and this really doesn't recognise the situation of the air quality management area that we're in Worcester City. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, I think it's 1.23 of the county's report, it says that this strategy is going to form part of Worcestershire's refreshed local transport plan, the LTP5. This has to be a much stronger document if it's going to have that significance in a wider strategy for the county. And what I see is that this approach doesn't fit Worcester. It may impact rural areas better, I don't know. And one thing it says is that, you know, 5 years, we've got this amount of money. It doesn't say how much that money is going to come to Worcester. It doesn't say, you know, because we've got this problem with nose to curb charging, actually site selection could be, there aren't any sites suitable in Worcester. It could be we get nothing spent. You know, that's the risk. With a 5-year plan, I would like to know, are they going to annually review it? Are they seriously waiting for 5 years to talk about taxes and private fleets? I mean, I can't believe it. You know, if you look at charging for taxis, actually that's a key way of getting taxis using electric vehicles. You know, they're at their taxi ranks. We do have idling, you know, we still see it, and actually that's a really important part of our air quality that we're talking about. So I would like us to say that because this is obviously clearly a really important document, part of the local transport plan, it has to be more ambitious. And I would expect a document of this sort to be looking at best practice from around the country. Other places that are doing things, like we've said, like you said, Hannah, somewhere else in the country, they're doing something better, maybe even Europe. You know, let's be more ambitious, and this at the moment lacks ambition. Thank you.
Any other comments that people want to make? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would just want to check that our County Council are aware about their on-street residential charge point scheme, which provides capital funding for precisely, well, as far as I understand it, for precisely this scenario of on-street charging, and there's grants available. So happy to send a link through, but it's just a click or two away. So please do raise that with John Hobbs tomorrow. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered whether other district councils, what their response has been to this. Do we know? Thank you.
We haven't had dialogue with the other districts, actually. So.
Councillor Scott.
Given the strength of response to what we clearly think is a significantly poor report and set of proposals, rather than just the officer referring in his meeting with them, I wonder whether we should go stronger in terms of our public response to this strategy. I think many of our residents are waiting to hear what happens on this, and I think rather than going to our usual individual Facebook routes, maybe a press release from the City Council would be in order.
David, do you have a view whether that's going to create any problems with the County Council? I think, as far as we've got a very strong view from the committee that we would like to make sure that we're very clear that Worcester City's view is that this consultation is not ambitious enough, and we'd want it to be a lot more ambitious for the city. Go on, David.
Through you, Chair. We've got a Worcestershire Leaders Board meeting on Wednesday of this week. I'm meeting Lynn tomorrow to go through the agenda. I suggest that the best way of handling this at this stage is I'll speak to Lynn tomorrow, and if Lynn is amenable, we could raise it under AOB at the Leaders Board meeting. I think that would probably be a more appropriate way of doing it at this stage, rather than go public on any sort of condemnation of the strategy at this stage. So that would be my suggestion for this week. If you know, but obviously members have a choice. Thank you.
Will our response to the consultation when we submit it be a public document, though? I assume it will.
It would be publicly available on request. It wouldn't be something that we would routinely publish.
Can we go further and make it public? I've got plenty of residents I know want to know what the answer to this is in my ward.
I think there's a balance here between, this is a consultation. We're working with the county officers, so we would feed back into that and present the views of the committee. I mean, clearly this is a public meeting tonight, and the committee have expressed their views very strongly. I guess that's something for us to probably consider, how we publicise this further if we wish to.
David, can I suggest that as ward councillors you can have your own response as well?
Of course, yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. Sorry, that's an omission from my report. It's open to everybody, to members of the public, to feedback into the consultation. I would expect to get a response to our submission. It's the 3rd of September that the consultation closes, so I think we would push for an informal response to that sooner rather than later, which will enable us to see where we are before the consultation closes.
So what we seem to be feeding back is that we want a very much stronger report, a strategy that this doesn't go far enough, it doesn't address the issues for Worcester. The advice from officers is we put that in, it's a public document, you can put your own responses in as ward members. We will expect the county council to respond, we will raise it with them through informal routes. But I think in answer to your question, Adam, I don't think that stops us if we don't get an adequate response. We follow the right channels, we see if we get an adequate response, and if we don't get an adequate response, it does not rule us out then doing a press release at that point. But I think we perhaps need to be very clear about the strength of the view of this committee. Are there any other substantive points that people would want to make sure gets covered in that consultation document, in our response to the consultation document? If not, are people happy to, that we've considered the report, and are you happy to delegate the authority to David, Karen and myself to agree the final wording of that document? Show of hands, is everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you. Our next item is flooding in Worcester, and I think it's over to you again, David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A somewhat longer and more detailed report, this one, which arises from a resolution of Council in February of 24, which referred a motion to the Council to this committee to consider, which really flagged up the increasing strain upon the city which flooding is causing. More frequent and more severe floods are creating a bigger impact on the city as a whole, on its residents and businesses, and on the City Council. So calling for further financial support, and also noting the link between flooding and sewage through combined sewer overflows, which is something that's been widely publicised and members will be very familiar with. So the request was to ask the Managing Director to write to the Department and to the Minister regarding levels of funding, and flagging a need for more natural flood management techniques along the length of the Severn to slow down the rate of water coming down to Worcester, and mentions the River Severn Partnership, which is mentioned later on in the report, the work that the River Severn Partnership should be doing. Just to note that a further motion to Council, which the Managing Director referred to earlier, was approved earlier this month, following the concerns raised around the viability of Worcestershire County Cricket Club, so very much a related issue. Right, Worcester has experienced flooding for hundreds, if not thousands of years, sitting on a floodplain, very steeply sloped on the one side, and actually a floodplain sitting right in the middle of the city that houses Pitchcroft and the cricket club, Chapter Meadows. And the council's always played a key role in supporting the city and its flood-affected communities. Section 3 highlights that actually the primary source of flooding for Worcester is the River Severn. Occasionally there's some surface water issues in intense storms and some of the tributaries, but largely the regular flooding and the frequent flooding comes from the River Severn. So the report gives you some information about depths and relative depths, and the increasing amount of flooding both in duration, frequency and depth of flooding. And those long-term forecasts that it will increase in frequency and magnitude. There are a range of impacts of flooding from riverside paths and the floodplains, which are areas of public open space, which go underwater first. Highways are obstructed at a slightly higher level. The work done on new roads has been really beneficial, but Dolday, for instance, water comes across that and the contraflow has to be enacted. Residential premises, there are two main areas at Diglis Avenue and Waterworks Road, both of which have got flood groups that the City Council is supporting, also some isolated properties. And of course businesses and the economy. Whilst the access actually caused by floods, the disruption to access is not that great, there's a reputational issue for the city about flooding, and the iconic pictures of the swans in front of the cathedral create an impression that the city's more badly affected than probably it is. Effects on the council supports with advice support, direct services, clean up, assisting residents and businesses, and generally staff are redeployed in order to do that on a temporary basis. As this happens more and more frequently, the impact on core services is much greater. A week away from core services once every couple of years is one thing, but if it's several weeks every year, every winter, that puts a much more significant burden on staff, and there are opportunity costs as well as real costs that the council incurs. So section 5 mentions a range of flood defences significant at Hilton Road, New Road. There's some flood bunds being built in Toronto Close at the moment, and a large amount of property level grant schemes, floodboards, resilience measures such as tiled floors, raising electricity sockets. And since 2020, the council's passed on over 300,000 in government funding for flood recovery and resilience measures, supporting businesses as well. I won't take members all the way through section 6. There's the responsibilities around a range of agencies there. A lot of detail in there. The main primary responsibility sits with the Environment Agency and then with the County Council as the local lead flood authority. The City Council does have a leading role. Our main flood management role is regarding to ordinary watercourses, which are the very much smaller brooks and ditches really. The Lawn Brook, the Duck Brook, the Aswell Brook, those are actually main rivers, so they fall to the Environment Agency. So it's more of the ditches and the culverts, some of the smaller ones that the City Council would look at. But our biggest role is in communication with communities at times of flood, understanding local needs, signposting to the lead agencies, and acting as an advocate, which we've been doing recently, supporting those flood groups. Section 7 talks about funding and funding that's available. There is actually very little specific flood funding available for councils. In times of large floods, the council can enact the Bellwyn scheme, which will give emergency financial assistance to local authorities. This is about taking immediate action to safeguard life or property. The amount of support is limited to anything over 0.2% of the council's annual budget. So to give some context, 22-23, the council is expected to expend up to 20,000 out of its reserves and budgets. Anything above that, Bellwyn would provide funding for. And in 2020, which was the last time that Bellwyn was enacted, the council received £6,000 against an expenditure of eligible expenditure of 25,000. There is, of course, much more ongoing cost, an opportunity cost to the ongoing support. Bellwyn applies to the immediate response to the emergency. Further in section 7, it talks about wider flood funding through DEFRA and the Environment Agency. I won't go into all the detail there. There is some detail there. But just to draw your attention to the conclusion, really, that flooding is something that the city has experienced for a long time, actually has adapted to and learned to cope relatively well. I always say that with a caveat that individuals who are affected by flooding are severely affected. It is a terrible thing to happen to a business, and particularly a residential premises. A lot of work's been done installing flood defences at community and an individual property level. That's much reduced the impact, but it hasn't prevented the impact. So those communities with floodboards and pumps are still impacted, and any flood defence only protects up to a certain height. So as floods get bigger, these defences can get overtopped. I've mentioned earlier the significant financial and the opportunity costs on the council. That's only going to increase with the greater severity and frequency of flooding. And the council may need, over the coming years, to consider setting a contingency budget for this, which will be challenging for us. And if it continues further, we may need a budgetary provision of some more mainstream resource. So whilst defences can always be improved and hired and pursued, there's a limit to those. There's a limit to what's feasible to construct based on local conditions, ground conditions, and cost benefit of those measures. There are smaller measures that we could look at, particularly on our own land, around slowing the rate of runoff of water. I think this is more appropriate for surface water flooding in very local conditions, but things like permeable surfaces that hold water back rather than it rushing straight down into the watercourses. The most viable strategy in the longer term is to mitigate the effect of flooding. To mitigate the effect of flooding is to implement some measures further upstream that hold back the flow and can release it under control conditions. So this is being investigated by the River Severn Partnership under what's called adaptation pathways work, and much higher up the catchment, potentially some significant schemes that would create effectively balancing ponds that would hold back higher levels of flow, and they would more slowly come down the catchment rather than the big surge of water that causes high level of floods. And then just to reinforce really, the City Council's role within this multi-agency partnership, and it is a big multi-agency partnership working on flooding response and longer term mitigation. Our role is to champion and lobby for the city's case as strongly as we can, to work with the Environment Agency, to work with the lead local flood authority, and to make that case for funding that is available to be directed towards the benefit of the city. And recently the corporate leadership team have recognised the need for us to be more proactively involved in that. So we may not be actually delivering work, but to be more proactively engaged with the strategic flood risk management. So we're increasing our involvement with the River Severn Partnership, as well as working really closely with lead local flood authority. And of course, alongside all of that, we are supporting our local communities and businesses in the day-to-day events. And this afternoon was the Diglis Flood Action Group had a meeting which we hosted here, and multi-agencies attended along with residents. So, Chair, I'll leave that there, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, David, for such a thorough report, which I hope everybody's had a chance to read. And also, it's good to know that the corporate leadership team are thinking about how to be more proactive. We've got a couple of people three people wanting to speak so far, so we're going to go to Councillor Cooper first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Lewing for her motion in February that's brought this detailed report to committee, and David, I'd like to thank you for your detail on this report. Many residents in Waterworks Road attended full council and watched that meeting. In times of floods, I go daily to visit them. And what they're saying to me is that with the cost of energy as it is, and pumps having to be on more frequently and longer time periods, that it's really affecting them, and the grants aren't covering their costs at all. And what I'm hearing from them is that people that thought they'd stay in that home for a long time are now thinking that as they're getting older that they won't be able to live there for as long as they planned. So this really does have a very direct impact on our residents. So I am always amazed at their resilience when this is happening, and they're so chipper even in these dreadful circumstances. So I'd really like to thank you for this report, and I'm particularly pleased to see that City Council is engaging with the Severn Partnership. Thank you.
Just to make one comment on there, the National Flood Forum is a national charity that supports flooded communities. It's been doing a lot of work with the Diglis community, and I'm pleased to say we've got our first meeting in the diary with the Waterworks Road residents, at which they will start to form a flood action group. So I can pick up outside the meeting when the dates are there.
Is it possible to ensure that you involve elected members in that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Youghal.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said somebody else, sorry. There's always a balance when it comes to flood defences in St John's have actually potentially caused more flooding on the other side of the river. It's diverted the problem away, and I know people have been lobbying me about that for some time. So I'm acutely aware that flood defences in themselves don't solve the problem, they just move the problem. And that is an element of concern. The issue of storm overflows is a growing issue of concern, especially on the A44 on the Bromyard Road, where the Lawn Brook crosses the road. That road, whenever there's a minor rainfall, it floods, and the road has to close, simply because the systems cannot cope with the drainage into Lawn Brook, and that is again a concern, that surface water is going into a nature reserve and is causing problems downstream. I do think that we need to work in more cooperation with other neighbouring local authorities to see if we can actually work together in cooperation to achieve some results. Because I believe one of the biggest problems I think I face in Worcester is the Southern Link Road acts as a dam and holds water back. And people have said to me over the years, since the Southern Link Road has been built, the problem has increased. Whether that's a direct result of the increase in climate change and the impact on extra flooding, I do not know. But I think some studies about the impact on the Southern Link Road may be relevant and may be worthy of some considerations, because it does act like a dam and keeps water in Worcester and prevents it from flowing downstream. I think we do need to work with our other local authorities and our neighbours, Malvern Hills, Wychavon and Wyre Forest District Councils, and the County Council and even the Fire and Rescue Authority, to see what we can do jointly as a local authority to actually tackle these issues and consider how we can actually create places for the water to run freely and held back and have a phased release elsewhere in the county, to see what we can do about that. Maybe nothing, but let's give it a go and see if we can work together to achieve something which will even have a minimal effect, will save some people's livelihoods.
I don't know whether you wanted to come back on that, just note that and we'll move on.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Just a question of fact, really. How many actual residential properties are there in Diglis Avenue and Waterworks Road who were inundated in 2014? And how many businesses affected at the floods at their peak? Some of them very obvious ones like Browns and the Worcestershire County Cricket, but how many actually done? And that's one point of question. But I'd also like to reinforce Councillor Udall's point about something we can do about flooding is our local generation of floods from our own landmass into local brooks, which is causing a significant problem along some watercourses. Barbourne Brook, another example. Most of them are in areas which don't flood, but it's increasingly an issue. And I think a shout out for sustainable urban drainage systems is always worthwhile. And finally, a point which is the issue about the River Severn is as much about pollution and water quality and about biodiversity down it as it is about flooding. I think I'd say there's three really big issues about the River Severn: flooding, water pollution and biodiversity, and we should be working, as I'm sure we are, on all three of those.
Thank you, Councillor. So a number of issues there. Exactly how many properties are affected at certain times is a question I get asked a lot, because when we're dealing with government and government grants. So I'm not going to give you a figure here, although I can make a pretty good estimation, but I can go back and check. And you said specifically 2014? Well, I think that was the one of the worst flood. Yes, yeah. Yeah. New road was blocked. Yeah, 2014 was a long flood. I think it was nearly 2 weeks of high levels. So I can come back to you with those figures. Certainly around water running off our own land, we have had an exceptionally wet year, really. So a lot of runoff has been a problem all over the place, with high water tables. If there are specific areas that ward members are aware of, really be very pleased to talk about those and see what we might be able to do. We had Severn Trent in the building today. We were talking about combined sewer overflows and some of the work and investment that they're looking to put in. I think they've just got their plans with the regulator at the moment, so we're waiting to see those come back from the regulator And hopefully then we'll have some specifics about particular outfalls that they're looking to invest in.
Yes, of course, with Severn Trent, it's not just about overflows from their sewers, it's the whole sewage system being inundated, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes. So of course, combined sewers, which is the largest part of the city, the oldest part of the city, foul and stormwater all runs together. So if there's a big storm, the sewers are inundated or they overflow. And then biodiversity, we have a biodiversity officer in post now. We're working up a biodiversity strategy that will be coming to this committee. Hopefully a draft will be coming to this committee in November is our plan. And watercourse is clearly a big part of that.
Have Councillor Lewin next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, David, and other officers, whoever's involved in this report. When I brought this as a motion to committee, I didn't know exactly what you were going to do, but actually looking at what you've written now, the River Severn Partnership, the long-term flood risk strategy, and us having our feet under the table, talking to those other people. I'm really pleased that you've attended a meeting, and you know the new meeting you've got with the Waterworks Road people. It's all about communication. It's about us raising our profile of the impact of flooding on our city. We're very good at coping up with it, and if we don't shout, actually people think we're okay, but we're actually not. And, you know, it's down to like this bigger picture of land use, but then we look at it at the very micro level. You know, when the Barbourne Brook floods, the play area is out of action. The play equipment degrades probably faster because it's being impacted by the floodwater. You know, there's all these little areas of the city that have that consequence of the flooding, which will impact us financially as well as, you know, how people feel about how they live here. Sometimes, you know, what's left is not very nice either. You know, I see the tremendous work of the officers, but I appreciate that they're actually coming off other work that almost sits on our committee scorecard as well. So it could be that we get overflowing bins that week. It could be that our street cleaning isn't quite as good. You know, and actually it's that whole delivery service of the City Council being impacted. So I really appreciate your work here. I think it's a really good report, and I really look forward to, hopefully an update on the report maybe in a year's time, if that's acceptable. Thank you.
Councillor Cross next.
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely echo those words of support and commendation for this work. And I was also going to raise the issue that when teams are called in to respond to cleaning up after a flood, for example, they're pulled off away from hedge cutting and mowing, etc., and then residents complain about that. During the summer, when you know, if we're behind on that and it doesn't get done before bird nesting season, then you know that's a real challenge. So particularly as our teams get reduced and we have less spare capacity due to financial constraints, yeah, this is going to hurt more, and it's going to be a bigger thing. Question, please. Do we know how many households have water butts and what the capacity is of those? Because especially in our older housing areas where there is combined rainwater and sewage drainage, every little helps in terms of attenuation, just particularly more for surface flooding, I guess.
Councillor, no, I think would be the answer to that question. I don't think that information is available. I'm aware of.
Is there a way that we could help to try to get that available? Should we ask our wards, etc.?
Yeah, if I can give that some consideration about the best way to address that. I mean, you're quite right. An empty water butt sat at the bottom of a downpipe just before a storm is going to take a fair old capacity. The water butt needs to be emptied and then able to fill up when we get a storm, particularly in the winter. But yeah, point to think about. So perhaps I can come back to you on that one. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also very pleased about this. As a young woman growing up in a house that was subject to flooding, I've noticed that Longfellow Road isn't listed. Does that mean it's secure these days, or is it just not one of the main flooding areas? Because it was Selwood Brook that used to becomes known as the Barbourne Brook when it enters. I'd be very pleased to hear that area is more secure. And I think they juggle it with the flood PERD as well, and that's become a little bit stronger. One of the things that sort of as a wider area, we all get the planning notifications, and I notice in the planning notifications there's a water table, there's a water report. That doesn't seem to very strongly reinforce the need for each and every plan, of building plan, to take account of its water and its water management. And that is something we could be a lot stronger with. New houses, I think this is something we could perhaps mandate or look to mandate, so that they are considering water table. Nobody's, and I mentioned it to the Severn and Trent when they were here, they said that, nobody requires, they're required to supply water, they're required to take the sewage away, but there doesn't seem to be enough sufficient ownership of the people putting the estate and the housing in to hold on or develop with that development with a water natured consideration. I noticed there was a property estate going up in Fernal Heath, and they'd actually put a water pond bund in as part of the development, and they'd built it in and they'd made it into a park. So they've made it into a residential area, which in the winter will become marshy, and what a wonderful little area, bit of a nature reserve, bit of a biodiversity. Can we look to do that I know we've got more constraints in the city, but can we do that?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Longfellow Road's Blankets Estate? Yeah, so you're quite right, that suffered very badly, I understand, in the 2007 floods. There is a penstock, it's called. It's a gate at the top of the culvert that runs down through Purd as well, golf course, the former golf course at Purd as well. So that can control some of the flows. I think the 2007 was an exceptional event, and water was coming from all directions. Yeah. With regard to planning and water management, for larger developments, what you're referring to would be a dry balancing pond, effectively. So those are installed around the city. Requirement of planning legislation. Councillor Oud will be familiar with some of the new estates in St John's that have got this SUDS. I think maybe for some of the smaller developments of one or two properties, that'll be a much smaller consideration. But something I'll pick up with our head of planning.
I've got 3 speakers left that I've got on my list: Councillor Cooper, then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. My statement was very, very simple in answer to Councillor Scott's. How many houses? There are 11 in Waterworks Road, for his information. Thank you.
Councillor Rudge.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question with 2 points really, but it's pretty much the same point. On page 31 at the bottom, to ask the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to implement natural flood management techniques so that rainwater can be absorbed. Do we have any progress on that, is my first question. And the related part is 8.8 on page 43. City is likely to implement measures to hold back the flow of water down the catchment and release it under control conditions. I don't know much about the River Severn Partnership, so any information on that would be helpful. But again, have we got any progress on that? Do we know? And does that progress extend over the border? I do sense that the problem really is in Wales. And I think I've mentioned before, I wrote to Severn Trent to ask them whether they work with other water companies, and they haven't replied, so I'm none the wiser. But I get the sense that they don't work together. And it seems to me that this is such a big problem. It has to have a big solution, as in wider than just our immediate area. The river basin as a whole, and I don't know whether Severn Partnership sort of tackles that issue or whether or not.
Through you, Chair. So the answer to that question, yes, the River Severn Partnership stretches across into Wales and deals with the Welsh equivalent of the Environment Agency, and has looked at some fairly major schemes actually up around Shrewsbury. Potential for those. It's a very early stage for this. This adaptation pathways is looking at different ways of adapting really to climate change and accepting that there is going to be more water coming down the river. So what are the different ways that this can be managed? There are some small pilot projects further up the catchment working with farmers and local landowners about slowing that runoff. it's a long-term project, so it's going to be, I think, into next year before sort of some of the results of those pilots start to come out. So we're talking about quite a long horizon, but also potentially talking about some fairly major, well, no, more than fairly major, some very major, perhaps civils works and construction works that would, we talked earlier about SUDS and sustainable urban drainage, which are sort of almost little scrapes in the middle of housing estates. It's the equivalent of that on a vast scale that would be able to impact upon the River Severn itself and relieve some of the volume of water that would come down the catchment.
They've not gone as far as thinking about building a dam? Well, obviously not enough.
We're going to move on. Councillor Uden.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Points I meant to raise earlier, and for some reason I didn't read my notes when I was speaking. And it's mentioned about mentioned earlier about the Lawn Valley, which is north of Alby Road, where there are 2,000 houses about to be built. All that water is going to go into surface water drainage, is going to go into the Lawn Brook. And we will have SUDS there, but we all know about the problem of SUDS and culverts getting blocked, which creates floods in themselves, which is why I was asking for some correspondence and cooperation with our neighbouring local authorities, because I foresee a huge problem with all that surface water draining off that new housing into the Lawn Brook and causing major problem not only for the environment and for wildlife and for the protection of the brook, but for houses which are adjacent to it and road network which is adjacent to it. And then I can then come on to the other issue, which is about, I think, just as significant as this, and it's partially caused by surface water drainage into our waterways, which is our water quality. And I think I mentioned at our last meeting that we need to start introducing water quality testing in the Severn and to examine just how unclean our water is, because it is going to be a problem for our future generations to try and have to clean that up, especially when we look at the SUDS and the problems which go with it, with SUDS. They will become an area for public swimming. People will use them, and people will die in them because they're not necessarily going to have life-saving equipment adjacent to them. And I've seen it happen. So we have to be prepared for the cultural changes as a result of the engineering works which we're trying to have to reduce the impact of flooding. Will have another dangerous impact as well. So we have to be cautious about what we wish for, but I think we need to work in cooperation with other local authorities, especially with the Lawn Brook drain off, to actually minimise the impact it will have downstream here in Worcester.
Just quickly comment on those two, Chair. Yes, we do work with neighbouring local authorities, and I'm sure as ward councillors you're very aware of the developments, but as you quite rightly raised. So that's something that we can engage with and continue to have a dialogue about. SUDS are designed that they don't, they prevent an increase in rate of runoff. So they should hold back the water so you get the natural runoff of the water from when it was fields. But they need to be maintained and they need to be properly designed. Regard to water quality testing, I think we need to give some consideration if the City Council was to embark upon a project like that. There are other agencies that have that responsibility. We can talk with them, and I think we need to know the implications and objectives before we committed to it. But there are concerns about the quality of water in rivers across the country.
Thank you, Chair. I know time's moving on, so I'll just make a couple of points, if I may. I know the answer to this because I just Googled it, but I wondered if members might even want to hazard a guess about the flow rate of the River Severn. In terms of cubic feet per second, it's 3,008. The average flow is 3,800 cubic feet a second. So I just wanted to put that into context when we talk about what we might be able to do and how that grows during the flood period to give you a scale of the challenge. You know, a lot of the things we've talked about this evening, unfortunately, are not going to make a jot of difference to the sheer volume of water that's travelling down from Wales. On a more positive note, I've written to Philip Duffy, the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency, prompted by the motion on the cricket ground. You'll know that I've been in touch with Ashley Giles on a number of occasions, and I'm now waiting for Tom Collins to I've also written to Tom, so hopefully Tom will be calling a meeting together. I've also asked him to raise this in the House of Commons. So I think that whilst the problem with the cricket ground is huge for us, I'm hoping that this might be the catalyst that allows us to get this further up the agenda nationally. Because at the moment we've tried and not got very far, so I'm hoping that this will be the thing that allows it to be brought to national attention, and I hope escalate or speed up some of the work that is being done by the River Severn Partnership, which seems to me to be many years away in terms of being able to really make a difference to what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Just bringing this to a conclusion. Councillor Lawrence, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. I was wondering how much the impact of the hard surfaces, pavements, roads, and in fact a lot of people have quite fairly dug up their front gardens and made them into drives because of the off-road parking and they want the electric point. So I was just wondering how much effect that is. I mean, is that an increasing factor? Are we that we're blocking off the access for the water to land on the ground and be absorbed?
Well, hard paved surfaces, clearly they move the water very, very quickly into the drainage system, and you know, something's to be encouraged in areas to permeable surfaces which don't make that difference. I mean, one driveway is a relatively small area, but of course, multiply that up by several thousands, it starts to become impactful.
So I think what we've heard is the scale of the problem that David's just outlined, but the fact that just because it's a difficult problem doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be trying to do things that can do that. So I think what we seem to be talking about is there's actions on various levels. There's local levels right down to the work which we'll be passing over to Karen to lead on in her role as chair of planning, to make sure that we're doing everything we can from a planning point of view, everything we can as a city council about how we manage our land and how we encourage people within Worcester to manage their land in the most effective way. And I think there's a role for us as elected members about actually getting them to work with the residents and to get those messages out. It's also the point that Richard was making then about working with our near partners to make sure that we're doing everything we can. And then that isn't going to solve the problem. We need to work with the Severn Partnership, and it's reassuring to know that CLT are already working on that and that David's already actively trying to get involved, and David's raising this at national level. So I guess what that we're looking to do is to make sure that we continue to do all that work, we push it as far as possible, and hope that you'll be able to bring back a report at a future meeting, which I don't think we want to specify a date yet. Is there anything else that anybody wants to raise at this point? Do we feel like we've noted the report and we've discussed some of this, David?
In the original motion, there was the request for this committee to consider whether I should write to the department. So I think that members need to consider that and give me a direction. I'm more than happy. Letters are going off left, right and centre at the moment. I would suggest, if with members' agreement, the original motion said to write to the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities, which is now the Ministry. I would suggest that I write to the Secretary of State in DEFRA, maybe the most appropriate letter, and I can then reference the fact that I've also written to the Chief Exec of the EA, and our MP will be raising it in the House of Commons. So if members are in agreement, I'm more than happy to write a letter to the Secretary of State. Thank you.
I'm seeing nods around the room. I just want to check with Councillor Lewing, as this was originally your motion, that you are happy with that and the wording of that.
Okay.
Yeah. Is everybody happy that we can, with that as the way forward, that letter be sent out, and we'll be looking to David to be progressing the work?
Yeah, if you just indulge. Members have been very kind in giving their thanks to the vast number of officers that worked really, really hard at times of flood. I just wanted to pay tribute to the residents and the people affected by that, who are both incredibly resilient and stoic in the times of flood, but are also working really, really hard to lobby and engage really professionally, I might say, on emergency plans, resilience plans, and to lobby for funding. So I just wanted to put that on record before the committee, the great work that's been done by those residents in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, David. That's a really important point, and nods around the room from members. Okay, bearing in mind that time is marching on, I'm going to move us on to the next item, which is about alternative approaches to managing weeds and invasive plants. And Sandra, I assume that's you.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, a little bit of background for the new elected members in Environment Committee. We took a paper late last year, perhaps early this year, looking at alternatives to managing weeds, and this is a progress report. It's not moved as quickly as we anticipated with the trials, so it is a progress report to just give you an update of where we're up to. But we gave the committee an assurance that we would look at alternatives to glyphosate, and although that has been approved until 2025 at the moment, we did feel that this was something that we should be looking at that enhances our biodiversity and sits very comfortably within our environmental sustainability strategy. So we have trialled at the moment some alternatives which were the fire, which was propane based, electric and steam. So once we've trialled the first two, the propane and electric, further investigation around health and safety, we felt that they were more risky for us to use on a day-to-day basis in that urban setting. And we also didn't feel that it produced the results that we anticipated. So we've sort of discounted that for the moment. We trialled a small steam system, and that was quite successful for low spot weed control, but it wasn't effective in mass weed control. So some of the challenges around that system that we trialled was need for additional power, the water supply, the movability of the unit. It wasn't that easy to move from place to place as the staff that were trialling it. And you needed a short hose length to ensure that you had enough power of that steam to keep the weeds removal successful. It also was quite time-consuming in its use. It took 20 minutes to heat the water up before you could actually even start using that. We did see that there was follow-up weeds quite quickly in areas that we'd treated. So although that was an area that we thought was useful in that low spot weeds, from a bigger area that my staff cover, we didn't feel that it was the best use of technology. So we've now looked to undertake a trial at the end of this month, next week and into August, which is also based on hot water, but it's heated via electricity, and then it's kept warm in an insulated tank. And it can keep warm for about 8 hours even after you've disconnected the power supply. So we think this is probably going to be a more versatile piece of kit. Manufacturer suggested, and we haven't trialled it yet, so we're still in the early days, that after 1 to 2 weeks, once it's been treated, we can remove via brushing, so that can be followed up with the operatives in the area. So we are proposing to undertake this trial. We also want to look at some of the pesticide-free towns. There's over 80 local authorities at the moment that have given assurance that they're moving towards pesticides. So we're going to look at best practice and see what they're using to see if we can replicate anything within the city environment. And we're proposing, if committee endorses this, that we'll bring a further paper back to November committee, looking at a 3-year phasing out of the glyphosate. We've got more understanding of the technology that's out there and be able to give a better picture to the committee. That said, it may look that we need to ask committee for further funds to purchase further equipment to undertake this piece of work. So I just asked the committee that they would note the contents of the report and endorse that staff within City Services continues to undertake further investigation in the use of steam and hot water and look at doing that 3-year phasing out period. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, then Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite pleased to see glyphosate going, and any form of pesticide, herbicide, because it affects us as well. It affects us directly, and I'm surprised people don't notice that more. I asked initially, when I first started, about the practice of poisoning around the bases of trees, and particularly I was thinking young trees. Is there any opportunity for perhaps weed suppressant around rather than having to try and poison? Because I'm not so sure applying lots of hot water is going to be sort of good for young trees and bushes as well. So is there any opportunity with that?
Yeah, we'll pick that up as part of the trial, and the report that we'll bring back to November committee, we'll have that in more detail, if that's okay, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you for this update. I think what you're doing is exactly right. We don't want to stop what we do and let the city get in a complete mess and get loads of complaints, but also we need to make sure that what we do is safe, affordable and obviously works well. So I think trialling and looking at other councils to see where they are on the journey is absolutely right. The only thing is I'd like us to go a bit quicker. I do think that a 3-year strategy is probably right, but can we please make sure that when we get annual progress, and actually by the end of 3 years maybe we are in a place where we only use chemicals for the most, the worst possible case where there's no alternative. So yeah, thank you. I do think the public is increasingly aware of this. We do get complaints from residents when they see people using sprays. I do think we have got public support for this. Thank you very much for the new officer. I hope we'll get a new enthusiasm. Thank you.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, more of a systems question, really. I mean, I've worked at some places where it's a nightmare trying to set up new suppliers on the account system. And I'm just wondering, obviously, with trials, it's, new companies coming in or potentially or setting up new things. Is that an easy process with our systems, or is it a real strain? And is that a barrier to to the rapidity of our trials? I mean, just a question. Thank you.
I think because there are a lot of councils that are also looking at reducing glyphosate, it's also the availability of the equipment that are being shared across several councils nationally. So I think that's also one of the barriers to us getting through this a lot quicker. But also, one of the things that we are quite keen on, that we robustly test the kit that we've got on trial to make sure that it is fit for purpose. So we don't just do one area and then leave it at that and hand the equipment back. So that has been one of the reasons it's been slightly hampered and a little bit slower. But I think now we've got this next piece of kit that's coming on higher to us, I think we'll move quickly and be able to be in a position of decide where we need to go with this.
It's certainly very encouraging to see, and please don't be deterred by the headaches that you find along the way. I think there's a lot of will for this to work. Thank you.
Councillor Udall.
This is a question based up purely on ignorance because I don't know much about this subject. But I did see a documentary television programme some time ago, and I'm desperate to try to remember which district council it was, and I can't, who gave up glyphosate or whatever it's called, I can never pronounce it correctly, and used uranium-based weed killer. I'm told that was natural and usable and is a better function than the glyphosate or whatever it's called, and is more effective. And it's also completely safe once it's dry. Now, am I being ignorant and thinking that this is an option which we could consider, or is it something which we have considered and have already rejected for whatever reason? Because I can distinctly remember the district council using it and claiming it was the saviour of all humanity because they were using this instead of the man-made chemicals.
Councillor, I'm not aware of that trial or move to uranium, but what I can do is that I can look into geranium. I thought it's geranium. 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 Sorry. I will look into that. I will look at. Thank you. I've just.
Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Sandra. In terms of Cathedral Ward and most of the urban wards, the key issue is highway weeds and weeds growing in gutters and along edges of walls and things. And that's not the subject of this report, is it? That's county responsibility? How do the highway weeds get killed at the moment?
It depends. Some of the stuff we will do on behalf of county, some county will do on behalf themselves. So it would depend on which of the areas specifically that we pick up on behalf of county. So I can look into that for you and come back.
But no green spaces involved. It's all hard surfacing and the weeds which grow in the crevices of gutters and paving slabs. Does the city do that?
Some of them we do. Yeah.
So I think we've noted the contents of the report, and I think there is an enthusiasm for this work to be pushed forward. And again, there's an enthusiasm for this committee, and I'm seeing nods around the room to making sure that we are trying to get more on the forefront of these rather than the follow-up, but learning from best practice, however that best practice might be, including geraniums. So I think, are we happy to endorse the further work to investigate the use of steam and hot water technology and of geraniums? and for a further report to be presented to this committee in November. Is everybody happy with that? I'm getting nods around the room. Okay, so I'm going to move us on and trying to just keep focused on the agenda on to item 9, ash dieback strategy and action plan. I can't believe we're on the 6th month of report of this already. And I think we've got some quite good news on the progress of this, so we're going to go over to Sandra again.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, earlier this year we brought the ash dieback strategy and action plan to committee and was approved to take forward, and we agreed that we would come back after 6 months with an update on where we are up to. And Appendix 1, for those new members to the committee, contains the strategy and the action plan for your information. I don't intend going through that. I'm sure that you've already read that at your leisure. We have surveyed quite a few areas of the high footfall. We categorised the areas as high footfall and potential high risk of category 3 and 4 trees. And we have done quite a few visits, or I've got them scheduled in this month and next month when there'll be full tree canopy. The early monitoring is quite positive in that we don't believe that we are in a position that we thought we might have been when we first did the strategy, and it looks like that a lot of the trees that we thought might have accelerated quite quickly to the more diseased trees are still falling into the categories 2, so that it's quite successful and not as, I think, ferocious as we anticipated. It is a moving feast, and we will continue to monitor all the trees as part of the strategy and the action plan. However, I think to date it is looking extremely positive across the areas, and I think that's to be commended from Tree Officer Warren, who's been working really hard in looking at the trees and inspecting throughout the last couple of months. However, what we have asked committee to consider is that we were allocated 65,000 as part of the ash dieback strategy and action plan for removal of any diseased trees. That the committee approves an expenditure of £9,620 to just engage additional resources to undertake some priority tree safety work, as there's been no impact on our ash dieback and is needed to use that funds to do that. But because we have been concentrating on ash, the general inspection has sort of taken a little bit of a backseat, so we would like to utilise some of that funds to backfill that and to get on top of our inspections.
So I think we had quite a debate about this, whether the £65,000 was going to be enough for ash dieback. And it's really good news that actually a lot of that money hasn't been spent because it hasn't been needed and our trees are in better condition. However, we do need to make sure we do protect the whole of our trees in our city, which is why the request to spend the money that was ring-fenced for ash dieback on the wider tree work in the city, which will, I'm assured, mean that by doing that, officers will have more time to look at ash as the canopy develops further with those trees. So that's the decision for the committee. I haven't had anybody putting their hands up at the moment. Anybody got any comments or anything they want to say about this report? Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, I just wondered, did we replace our tree officer in the green spaces? Good. And I was quite pleased to read that that we're finding resistant ash trees. That is very hopeful. I'm really pleased with that because at one point they were thinking, was it 97%? So there's hope for the ash, and we may see it continue.
Councillor Rudge.
Thank you, Chair. Sandra, may I ask whether the fact that it's not as serious as we thought is because the progression of the disease is much slower than we anticipated, or because it just hasn't spread and there are far more resistant trees? Thanks.
I think it's a little bit of both. We're finding there are more resistant trees than we anticipated, but also it's not spread as quickly as we first thought when we had the initial report, some probably 12 months ago now. So it's a little bit of both, really.
Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I support this preferred option, the 9,620 for high priority tree work. You're absolutely right. All our trees are important. We are focusing on ash dieback as we should, but making sure that we can address all of our needs is really important. So I support this. Thank you.
And I'm very strongly supportive of this. I'm seeing nods around the room to confirm. Is everybody happy to confirm that? Could we just have a quick vote to make sure that we are clear that, yeah, that's unanimous, that's fine. Did anybody else want to comment on this report? I think the issue is we've discussed ash diebacks in such level and such depth, and I think it's a credit to the work that Doug and the tree officer and all the team have done, that we've moved from a position of this being something that elected members were very concerned about to something I think that we're more reassured about the work is happening. We are going to continue to very focusedly monitor all that, and as the canopy grows and develops, we'll be monitoring those trees, and I'm very reassured that we're looking at all of the trees across the city and not just ash. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in Warndon Parish or Leopard Hill, St Nicholas, there are issues of unadopted land, and just want to check that we are in dialogue, that the dialogue is working okay with the appropriate managers of the two companies who, as I understand, own the majority or pretty much all the unadopted land. And it does raise a question as to how the adoption process is going on. I'm happy to take that outside the meeting, but certainly a number of resident concerns raised relate to trees on unadopted land. So that connection is really important. Thank you.
Councillor Cross, I'm not aware that there are any issues regarding City and the developers, but I will go back and speak to Warren once you've raised that question and check that we haven't got any issues. But I would have thought if we did, that they would have come to my attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, I'm going to move us on to our final substantive report, which is the Waste and Recycling Update Report, which again I think is you, Sandra.
I'm going to get sick of hearing my voice tonight, aren't you? So, at an earlier committee, we were asked if City Services could give a flavour of the work that we deliver for the residents and elected members across Worcester. Waste and recycling, I think, because it was quite a hot topic on the scorecard, we were asked if we could do that as the first in-depth report. So I'm hoping that if this doesn't quite hit the mark, that we could have some feedback for the next one that we'll do for street scene in November's committee. So I've brought it down to back to basics, and I know that a lot of people know a lot of information around the recycling service, but a lot of people don't. And I've started around our current collection disposal, that we're the collection authority, with the county being the disposal authority, and also how that works once we hand over the waste that we've collected to Ulster County Council, and how's that disposed of. At present, we've currently got domestic residual waste, which goes to Waste to Energy, which is a facility at Hartlebury. The domestic recycling goes to EnviroSort at Norton, and I know that a few councillors have expressed a desire to go and visit that, so that's something that we will look at for the committee members. The domestic garden waste goes to Hill and Moor composting site near Pershaw. Our trade residual waste also goes to Waste to Energy, and our trade recycling goes to EnviroSort. So we do offer a trade waste service at the moment for residual and recycling, and we will be looking at food waste as that comes on board in legislation March 2025. Service operates 4 days a week, Tuesday to Friday, and as everybody is aware, next week we'll be changing to the whole city, moving to residual, with the following week the whole city moving to the fortnightly recycling, with the odd numbers that have weekly recycling and residual due to the location of the premises. In Appendix 1, I've done a pictogram of what we collect from a recycling point of view, what goes in the green bins. So I hope you found that quite useful. And the other thing that I do want to draw your attention to, because I know that this was something that was asked, is around benchmarking and performance measures. So in Appendix 2, we've got some information there that was produced by RAP of 11 comparative authorities that were very similar to Worcester City, and how they collect and how they fare in the recycling rates. Also in Appendix 3 shows the yields per household across the same authorities. In paper, card, glass, we were quite high in our yields, but we were below the other authorities in metal cans. Also in the graphs shows the percentage for those who are used to the scorecard around household waste recycling, and that has remained consistent, although we have dipped slightly in the 23-24 cycle. And our green bin waste has steadily decreased, so this is something that we're quite keen on looking at from a recycling point of view. In 2012 and 13 we were 31.4, and we have dipped considerably to 27.6 in the latest figures. I won't go through, as time's pressing, all the graphs, but they're there for the information. We have also used the off-log metric of contamination. This is not something that we've previously produced for the scorecard, but this will be part of the Environment Committee going forward. And as you can see, we've had a steadily increasing contamination. So the two areas that we really want to look at are increasing that recycling, but also ensuring that we reduce the contamination that we're taking through to EnviroSort. I've put a little bit around communication and engagement, and we don't have a dedicated resource for that. I know Councillor Rudge asked whose responsibility it is, but we haven't got a dedicated comms resource. We do use the existing resource within City Council to push out key messages. And we have done bespoke campaigns around sustainability and increasing that recycling, but it's not something that we've done day to day, and I think we do need to look at that in more detail, as it's not a one-hit wonder. We need to continue with our messages, and it's that drip constant information overload to our residents to get people into that habit of recycling. So if I can just quickly take you through the options As I've mentioned, we would like to look at recycling and contamination as the focus from the waste team. But I have also put in there around reduction in frequency and whether 3 weekly collections is something that we should be looking at. And I am aware that around simpler recycling, the government or the previous government has said that we should be collecting on a fortnightly as a minimum backstop. But I am aware that quite a few councils have introduced 3-week collections despite simpler recycling being out there and given the guidance. So that's something that we do need to look at and to give consideration to. The other way that you can squeeze residual is around a smaller bin. However, in the city, we have reduced to 180 litre bins for residual waste. And in some areas, whilst they do have a 240, in the main, it's generally a 180 litre bin. So although we will consider that as one of our strategies, longer term, I think we've sort of pushed that through. And there is the additional cost that if we had to change everybody's bins to an even smaller bin, 140, that would come with a considerable cost for us to do that as part of the council. One of the big areas that I do think we need to look at is around Re-London, and that's relondon.gov.uk. They've done quite a lot of insight reports around tackling contamination and a lot of good practice, I think, that we could lift and drop into the city and pilot. So we would like the committee to endorse us to continue looking at those two streams, increasing recycling, reducing contamination, and developing a communication engagement plan to take forward across the city. Thank you.
So the focus of this discussion is really around strategic things, but I'm just going to use my prerogative of being the one that gets to speak first and ask a very practical question, because I think it's of relevant to all members. Next week is the week when the big change happens. I'm sure Karen and I, as Chair and Vice Chair of Environment Committee, will be told if there's anything that goes wrong or any big issues. But I guess it's an appeal that if there are things that go wrong in particular wards, particular areas, can you make sure that you are alerting the local elected members to the issues that are happening in their wards, so they are on the front foot for when the complaints start flooding in, so that they're not that I'd rather have you saying to them, we know this is an issue and we're beginning to have issues, and then elected members know, than the other way around. So that's just an operational thing which is linked to this, but not the main purpose of the report. The main purpose of this report is looking at that strategic way forward of how we tackle waste in the city, and particularly how we improve recycling. And at the moment, I've got Councillor Cooper first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am concerned about contamination. So when Karen and I walk around the ward, we often see bins that are obviously contaminated, especially recycling. As ward members, what can we do? And second part of that is what a city council planning on doing to educate the people with that particular bin. Thank you very much.
So part of the long-term strategy, Councillor Cooper, is to look at around that engagement and education. And I know we've got two schools of thought. We've got the wish cyclers who put things in that can be recycled but cannot be recycled in our green bin. And then we've got the ones that perhaps recycling is not the top of their agenda, that will probably use all the bins to fill up with anything that they can. So we do believe that there's going to have to be two different strands to this, and we want to look at the education from the crews in the first place with in-cab technology, identifying the bins first and foremost that are problematic, so that we can then start doing bin tags, letters, and follow that up with waste audits. We have obviously got an enforcement arm at the end, but we'd rather try and change behaviour than going with a big stick. So it's going to be a plethora of different measures, and it's not going to be one size fits all. It will be dependent on a case by case. So really we could do with you letting us know if you see anything that we've not picked up on. That would be really useful for us. But with the in-cab technology, the crews will be able to see my bin has not been presented correctly and the wrong items are in, and they'll tag it, and then that'll feed through to the back office, and then we'll start generating letters, visits, etc.
Thank it is really important to listen to the crews and see, and it's important that recognition of the differences in the city from those who are wish cycling to those who are just putting things in, and we do have diversity within the city. I'm going to go Councillor Scott next.
Thank you. Sandra, you mentioned enforcement. Can you expand on that a bit more? I've got a couple of questions. Do bins get rejected by crews? Do persistent offenders get letters or notices stuck on the bins? What is the form of enforcement? That's the first question. Secondly, in terms of the options, did you say when you were summarising that we would be looking at the 3 weekly collection? Is that one that wasn't on your options list? I don't think, was it? I know it's referred to in the report. And thirdly, and this is a really issue for locally in the city centre type locations, if we're considering radical steps such as 3 weekly collection, I think we need to take alongside that some more overview look at the whole nature of rubbish, refuse coming from households in tight streets. Because we've got, in Cathedral Ward, for example, we've got plenty of properties where they're privately run, communal properties up to 50 or 200 properties, and with communal waste services which cause no problems at all, no unnecessary bins cluttering the pavement, all the way down to tiny properties where there isn't room for a wheelie bin to be kept off the street, and they're blocking pavements up and down the city centre, through to areas which don't have any bins at all, and people are using refuse sacks. So we need to look at those different scenarios and see if there's a solution to it. I would urge thinking a more continental system, which is about large communal wheelie bins where local residents can take their rubbish from their front doors and go out into the street to put it in there. I know there are problems with that in terms of even greater contamination, but we should be considering that, I think, in some locations. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll try and take that in order. So at the moment, we have got an environmental officer who is doing, just one at the moment, yes, who is doing a plethora of environmental enforcement for fly tipping, littering, dog failing, etc. And we are training up civil enforcement officers that work in parking, so they'll have a dual role from an environmental point of view that will insist from the lower level littering, dog failing. But we haven't really done much in the way of enforcement from a waste point of view other than fly tipping. So that's something that we're going to develop. It's part of the Environmental Protection Act. It's under section 46, which is a notice. It is a long process. It's not a quick fix. And that's why I said, in real terms, we'd like to change behaviour, educate and get people recycling more and reducing that contamination than rather going down the enforcement route. But there is that power that we have as a local authority. Yeah, so that would be a notice and can ultimately result in a fixed penalty fine. As I said, it's not one size fits all. I think we've got different areas within the city that we need to look at, whether it is shared Euro bins, and I do mention around HMOs and looking at how other councils have worked with landlords around ensuring that they're presenting the right material in the right bins. So that's something that we will look at, and receptacles, because it's not just one size fits all. We have got some residents who do have bags at the moment, and that'll be problematic for us going forward with the new legislation, because we will have to collect glass from those properties and they can't put glass in the bags. So again, that's something that we will have to look at. And then finally, I've mentioned 3 weekly collections in 7.2, reduction in the frequency. So that's something that we've got an eye on to see what comes from the new government, of whether we'll be able to look at 3 weekly or whether it will still stay as a minimum backstop of fortnightly. Yeah. Is that okay? Thank you. I think I've answered everything there.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Hearing some really good things here. Thank you. The engagement in education. Have we a plan of doing this through our local schools? Because often children can be really good change agents for their parents. I know mine have knocked square corners off me, and you know that's a very cost-effective way of reaching an awful lot of people. And also within education as they get older, university accommodation, having seen how things were in Leeds and Sheffield with 2 daughters at move out time, there's a particular time of year, at, early summer in particular, where the whole sort of, well, any bin, and how we deal with that, how we prevent that, how we tackle that, potentially through the university. But I also remember when I was 16 for the first time, many years ago, going out to Germany, being staggered that people got fined if they didn't segregate their recycling properly. And it was significant fines. I think it was something like €1,000 when I was a student in Germany later, in Augsburg, okay, South Germany. But, there's carrot and stick, but certainly carrots, education and working in the first instance through schools could be really good. So love to hear our strategy of that and how we can help as well.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Yes, we will look at schools. We did quite a big piece of work around eco-schools when I worked back in Wigan, and that was quite positive and quite useful. And as you say, they go home with the messages and tell the parents off because they're putting the wrong thing in the wrong bin. So that's something that we will look at. As part of that comms strategy in the build-up to the changes to the collections, we've worked quite closely with our community engagement team and also colleagues in county around doing some pop-ups. So whilst we've been giving the messages out that the collection's changing, we've seized the opportunity to also give the messages out, and this is what you should be recycling, this is what goes in this bin, etc. So it's early days, but we are starting to push those messages out. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's the confusion that my residents, it's what can I put in the bin and how do I put it in the bin? So, and do we crush it? Do we put the lid on? Do we put the screw tap back onto the wine bottle? That's the sort of thing they'll ask. And the other thing I was wondering is, do we dynamically take the approach of, does every house in the street get the same bin size, or do we take account of the occupation level of that houses? And do we address it? So I've seen bins absolutely overflowing with nappies, for instance, and then that family grow up, they don't need that bin capacity. Do we go back and address and review that? We do. Thank you.
Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this report. I think, as you know, Zoe and I have been talking about making the progress on the recycling rate in the city, and I think the recycling contamination rate going up in recent years shows what happens when you take the eye off the ball, and that isn't us alone. This is also to do with county. I remember when I first came to Worcester, there was loads of information about waste, and actually probably what's happened is some people have moved out of the city and some people have moved in, and there is confusion. When Zoe and I went to the recycling site, we did see all sorts of wish recycling. I made a little list. I remember we saw electrical equipment, we saw wood, we saw clothing, food waste, polystyrene, and all sorts of metal. And glass that gets used, like a glass bowl for cooking, is not the same glass that's in a jam jar. So there is confusion out there. It's not necessarily always neglect. I think people do care, and obviously it's really important. So I really welcome this. Thank you very much.
Just to reiterate Karen's point about the communications, considering our involvement, there were things that we were learning. So always make sure your cardboard is A3 size and not any bigger. How many people knew that until we'd actually been there? And it's that level of detail. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I'm a bit concerned about the changeover next week because I haven't received a letter about it, and Richard has just said he hasn't received a letter. Does that mean there's a whole chunk of the city that hasn't received a letter?
I've never changed.
I'm black this week.
Right, I will double check that. I know that we did about 18,000 properties last week and we had about 5,000 to complete this week. So whilst we're on a Tuesday, you may still be getting to receive that, but they should all be out by Friday with a collection calendar and additional bags. So I'll double check that for you tomorrow, Councillor.
I think it just reiterate my point about making sure we keep all the local elected members informed as the issues roll out next week. I think what we've got from this meeting is seems to be an endorsement for the communications and engagement plan and the need for that. Our people were being asked to note the contents of this report and endorse further report work being carried out for communication and engagement. Are people happy to go with that recommendation? It seems to be that there's nods around the room. Is there any other comments before we move on? Councillor Rudge.
I don't know how many people here don't need to put out their black residual bins every fortnight. We certainly don't. Is it possible to trial in an area that option? Because it's quite a big shift, isn't it, to go to 3 weeks instead of 2. Could you trial it in one area and see how it goes?
As long as it's not St John's.
No.
Councillor, you can request to have a smaller bin if you feel that the bin size you've got 180, because we do have 140s available. So if anybody does feel that they've too much capacity in their residual waste, then we're more than happy to do on a case-by-case exchange. Is that?
I think the point you're making is you'd quite like to trial a less frequent, but actually legally at this point in time we'd be going against central government requirement. They're saying we have to keep a minimum of fortnightly at this point in time, so we'd be contravening that. I know other areas have, but I don't whether that's something that we'd want to be contravening the guidance. Perhaps, but recognising that the point that you're making.
Sorry, you meant frequency as opposed to size. Yeah. No. You've answered that.
I covered that.
You've covered it perfectly, thank you.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just really timely to repeat, and I really appreciate the simplicity of it, that the messaging for all residents, because local, people are amazing in how they can misunderstand or interpret what's written on a page or information, but the key messaging simply for everyone, everywhere, next week, in the week starting the 29th, that's the day the black bin goes out, regardless of what your schedule was, and after that, the week after that is the green. That's the simple way that seems to be cutting through after quite a lot of attempts of how to put it differently to people on social media especially. So a lot of people still with a lot of questions, and hopefully that's a simple message, which it was great to see on the website coming through. So basically that simple message of next week's the black bin week for everybody. Thank you.
I think there's a role for elected members to do everything they can in all your different social media ways to reinforce that message that the City Council are already doing. Okay, in that case, I'm going to move us on to any other business, and we do have at least one item of any other business. Are there any other items that anybody's emailed me about and I just haven't picked up the email? No, so we're just going to go over Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. A young, she's a brownie actually, handed me a petition that she's raised 71 signatures to get a green bin and a black bin on her walk to school. And she's even indicated where she thinks it should go by the pedestrian crossing on the Ombersley Road, which is a cycle route. It's a route between two shops, and it's also a route for schools. And she'd like to see a refuse bin and, well, she initially asked for a recycling bin, but I think a black bin would be useful too. So that's a petition for 71 people wanting a bin on the Ombersley Road, please.
So presumably we're going to note that. Is it possible to send a formal response to the brownie to say that we've noted that, the committee have noted it and they will consider it, very aware that there has been a review of bins and therefore you need to consider that, but if you could write and say that you will consider it and it will be looked at, I presume that's what you're looking for at this point in time, and also to bear that in mind, bearing in mind it's not that long since we did a formal review. Yeah. Is there any other items of any other business? Councillor Rudge.
Chair, may I be very cheeky and respond to David Blake's request about knowledge of water flow with asking whether he knows how many major infrastructure projects have been built by water companies since 1990? Or anybody? One. It's very, very poor.